I'm showing almost, I'm showing 7 o'clock. So a few announcements before we begin class. I'm glad everyone could be here. It's good to be in here where it's cool. And appreciate Tim, appreciate you guys paying the light bill. So some announcements before we begin class. Help with summertime snacks is needed. There's I think just a couple of weeks that aren't covered yet. If you're interested in helping with snacks during this time, you can sign up on the Sign Up Genius on the Summers Family Exchange or on Facebook, or you can get in touch with Allison Penrod. Summers Kids' third Fun Friday of the summer will be this Friday the 28th from 10:30 to noon in the Activity Center. And let them know that you're planning to bring a child on the Family Exchange on Facebook. Ladies' Chat will be the 28th. And for the men, for men's breakfast, since the first Thursday of the month falls on the 4th, we've kicked it. Yes, ma'am? No chat this summer. No chatting. No chatting allowed this summer. Sean, we probably shouldn't comment anymore. Anyway, we'll just move right along. We must move right along, yes. Men's breakfast, usually the first Thursday of the month. Since the first Thursday is on 4th of July, we're going to kick it forward to the 11th. And so that'll just be for the month of July. Tim Jorgensen still recovering from knee replacement surgery, and he's at home and doing the therapy. No visitors right now. Pam Lewis will start radiation therapy on July 1st. Cecily Story, many of you saw this on the Facebook Family Exchange. She was admitted to the hospital Sunday night due to some malfunctions with her insulin pump, and she went into ketoacidosis. She's now at St. Vincent's in Little Rock in CCU. Home? All right, good.
But she's still having some complications.
Okay. All righty. But anyway, you can contact her directly. I don't know about visitors. They say just calls. Okay. All righty. And of course, for other information, you can always go to the webpage for the church. Paragould's Children's Home, the truck will be here July the 15th for their quarterly food pickup. The items that they most need at this time are Ritz crackers, cheese crackers like Cheez-Its, graham crackers, all kinds of snack cakes, spaghetti rings, and ravioli. And just a reminder, please check expiration dates. They cannot use anything that's past its expiration date. And there's a red tub in the middle hallway back by the mailboxes. You can place the food there. And if you got any other questions, Mark Goodsell, Joe Ellis, or the elders can answer those questions. And of course, the Children's Home thanks everyone here for their continued support. And most of you have contributed in one way or another different times for them. Okay, as usual, I'll be listening. There's several listening online, and so I'll be watching the YouTube channel. Sometimes they send a question through, and I'll be watching for that, and I'll share that with you. And remember, some of your questions, if I don't think they're loud enough to be picked up by that microphone there, I'll repeat them so that the folks at home who are listening in can hear. There's usually 10 or 12 people, or 10 or 12 views, or maybe more than one person. And so, this week, we're going to be talking on behalf of Rebecca. There are 2 different times prayers are made on her behalf, and we're going to talk about those as we continue through our prayers of the Bible study. 2 weeks ago, we talked about Jonah and his prayer and his conversations with God, which were not entirely cordial, I guess, for maybe a good description of that, and his disagreements with his instructions as a prophet. And then, of course, Abraham's prayer on behalf of the righteous who lived in Sodom, or who, of course, he knew that his nephew did. The first prayer is for Rebekah, although we don't know, or the people involved don't know that it's for Rebekah. It's for, as yet, a young lady to be named later, and then after she's married, on behalf of her to have a child. And so we'll be talking about that. Choosing who we marry is, to me, without a doubt, besides choosing to obey God, to become a Christian, choosing who we marry is the next most important decision that a person will make. It's critical. And that's there. But in this case, I don't think Isaac or Rebekah got a vote. It was kind of decided for them. But that was not uncommon in this day and time. I've given you a reference from a book, Manners and Customs of the Bible Lands. It was felt that if the parents made a decision, which they did many, many times, here's who you're going to marry, that decision came directly from God through the parents, and so that the children were obliged to comply or obey, or however you'd want to put that. Totally foreign to Western young people who live in the Western Hemisphere. Try that. Just go ahead and try it if you want to, if you know a young person who's looking to marry, and see how far that gets you. I got 2 kids. They married exactly who they wanted to marry, and I'm thankful they made good choices. And that's what we're used to here, but that's not the way it is all over the world. Did look this up. It was interesting to me. I looked up in Immigration and Naturalization Services. They track things like this. Mail order brides. About 4,000 to 6,000 men in the United States every year have a mail order bride. And they track this because there's an immigration issue and a naturalization issue, citizenship issues. They keep track of that. I thought that was interesting. So transactional, I call it transactional marriages, are still occurring. And in other parts of the world that we are not used to those cultures, parents are much more involved in choosing mates for their children. And we have negotiated with the parents of this child, and we've agreed, and here's your bride or your husband. Congratulations. Not so here. So we're not used to those kind of things. And there are examples, however. Jacob served 7 years and loved her for those 7 years before they married. And now if you read the commenters, there's a lot of debate whether or not he married her, then worked 7 years, or had to work 7 years and then married her. So you can read the commentaries and sort that out yourself. But I feel like he probably had to work for her first. But anyway, then the second prayer, when a young lady gets married and wants to have a child, when she is struggling to have a child, it is one of the most distressing times in a young woman's life that she can go through. And most of us have experienced that in our family ourselves, or know someone, and we know how distressing that can be. The desire to have a child is there, and it's natural, and it is distressing to a family that's struggling with that. And so we know of people that have gone through that, and so that there will be that discussion on that second prayer. So Genesis chapter 24, I'll be going quickly through the chapter as we go through this. In the first 9 verses, Abraham's old, he's advanced, and remember, he's pretty wealthy. And the future bride, her family is pretty wealthy too. So anyways, we go through this. He calls his servant, and there's different debates about who this servant was. I don't think it's important for this study. And he says, I want you to make an oath. Don't you take a wife in verse 3 for my son. Don't take her from the daughters from the Canaanites. I don't want you to do that. And later on he says, don't take my son back to Mesopotamia to get married. She's got to come here. And he makes him take an oath saying that. A critical statement about Abraham's belief is in verse 7. he talks about the oath that God made to Abraham, and he said, he will send his angel before you. Abraham had full confidence that God would intervene and affect what was happening in the decisions of these two families. He had full confidence. Why do you think Abraham didn't want his son to marry a Canaanite?
It's because of the promise. It's supposed to be the lineage following in the family.
Okay, is the lineage through the wife or the son? Well, yeah. Why else? I mean, I agree with you, George, but I don't think that's all of it. Why else?
They're heathens.
They're heathens. Do what? Exactly. Just a few chapters before, God had told Abraham, you're going to go to Egypt, you're going to be there 400 years, you're going to come back here, and he makes a critical statement, because the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete. Because when they came back, what were their instructions? Destroy everybody because of their sin. And God had given them basically 400 years to get right, and he says, and that by the time that 400 years is up, their sin is going to be complete. It's kind of like the discussion we had with Jonah. God had given Nineveh time, and he said, okay, 40 days. Jonah, go tell them, you got 40 days, and I'm done. And so God does have limits to his mercy. Why didn't he want him to go back to his homeland? George kind of answered that, didn't you? Because the lineage and the promise was this land, and it was going to be there. And so that was part of it also. And we know that Abraham was assured the plan would work because he believed in this wholeheartedly that God was going to send his angel ahead to however this works. However, we don't know how the Spirit moves and makes things happen, but he felt like his angel would intervene and make things happen. So in verses 10 through 14, the servant left. He took 10 camels, set out with a variety of good things from his master, and he went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. He bowed down. He came to a watering location, a well outside at the edge of this city, had the camels kneel down, and here's his prayer in verse 12. O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also, may she be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. So the servant's request, he wanted intervention. He wanted intervention by God. He had been told that God was going to send his angel ahead. So, was the servant a believer? And there's a specific reason I'm asking you, is he really a believer?
Well, maybe not. Well, yeah, he prayed.
He prayed.
An answer.
Okay.
Maybe because of what he had seen over the years coming to his master, to Abraham.
Okay. He believed in his master. And you, Vanessa, that's kind of where I was going. Both of you kind of addressed that, because he said, who did he say? The God of my master. He didn't say my God. He said the God of my master. I don't know, and I'm not going to 100% say that's a definitive statement that he was not a believer. He believed his master. He believed what Abraham had told him, that he was going to send his angel. It just, the way that it's worded there, it may just be a translation thing. I don't know, but the fact that he says, the God of my master, just makes me think, he's a hired hand here. Okay.
Well, Tommy, the task that he asks is not a simple one. Just to drink of water is one thing, but camels, they drink
A lot of water. And how many camels were there? 10. And he didn't go by himself. He had dudes, he had people with him. You didn't carry all this stuff and travel by yourself. For one thing, it wasn't safe. And it takes more than one guy to handle livestock like that. They're not the most cooperative creatures in the world if you've been around them. All right. So how did the servant approach God? Whether or not he was a believer, we could go back and forth. How did he approach God?
Humble, but he believed.
Humble, but he believed. Okay. Carefully, right? He didn't go in and say, look, Abraham said, so let's have it. He didn't make that approach. So whatever his believing status is, he approached God in an humble manner, and I think that's important. Was it appropriate for him to ask for a sign?
In that day and age, it wasn't unusual.
Wasn't unusual, no. Do what? He didn't want to get the wrong, go home with the wrong woman. Yeah, it could be problems. So, you know where I'm going to go next. Is it wrong for us to ask for a sign on our prayers when we're asking for something? I mean, is this an altruistic prayer? Is it important and good to ask for the right woman for his master's son? Is that...
He said, you know, there's this going to happen. That's how he would know. If we prayed for that, would we ask for the sign? If they pull up in a nice
Would we ask for Rebecca to show up with a...
make conditions?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, Charles.
It appears to me that he knows that he has to get this accurate, 100% accurate. He's in bad trouble. One thing he knows.
Right.
He had to have some kind of proof. No other way he would know it, I'm sure. There's God in
He would need to. I mean, does he know anybody in this town? Mm-mm. Tim, did you have...
Just on the odds that he may have been a believer. He may have saved the God that my master would give him more pull because he knew Abraham's relationship to God and all he had done for Abraham rather than using his own mind.
Good point. That's a very good point. For those listening online, the fact that he said, the God of my master, he's counting on the relationship between Abraham and Jehovah, that I could see that. I mean, he's a guy that follows instructions. He's a guy that follows orders. He's a servant. And so it would certainly be a good idea to say, recognize God and Abraham have got, it's obvious that God and Abraham have a great relationship and that Abraham trusts God totally. He said he was going to send an angel ahead of me, and so it's kind of reminding, say, look, this is on Abraham's behalf. Good point. Thanks. All right.
Do you really believe that God gives signs now? I don't know.
Okay. All right.
That's part of Old Testament.
Okay. What is a sign? First off, let's all agree. What would be a sign? This is
Something happened.
okay. Another example is Gideon, isn't it? Gideon said, "I want the wool to be wet and the ground dry, and vice versa." That's a sign, and that's miraculous. Was this miraculous?
Yes.
Yes. It's not. She went every day probably to get the water, but he ran into just the right one at the right time. And so if it's me, it wasn't supernatural, but man, it's like everything was just right.
Stars aligned.
And this, Karen, and I've struggled with this about a sign or an answer to a prayer. And, you know, if we pray about something and then it happens, we pray on behalf of someone. We want someone to be obedient. We want someone to become faithful. We want Maybe it has to do with employment. Maybe whatever. And it happens. The question I would have, that I would struggle with, okay, was that a sign? My prayer was answered, but I wasn't assured that it was going to happen. So is that a sign?
Providence.
Providence. Okay.
I want to believe that it's a sign, believe it's a sign.
Okay. Yeah. It's something to think about. I agree that if I was to say, Lord, I want something, and I want to lay a blanket out into the backyard tonight, and I want it to be wet and the ground perfectly dry, I would not ask that. Chris, you're grinning from ear to ear.
Well, I was just about to say, you don't have no faith.
Okay. Woo! Oh, ow. Man, I need a Band-Aid. We are.
I think more or less it's a matter of, am I going to be willing to be looking for the things that are placed in my life that are going to draw me closer to the answers God's already provided? So, can I pray to God, help me be more willing help me be more able to see what you need of me in my life?
Okay.
The answer is yes. Whether you want to call it like
A sign, yeah.
whether you want to call it a sign or not, that's now I don't believe that we get those grand miraculous signs.
Right.
But if we're walking a life that is dedicated to God faithfully, then just about anything that we can say, this worked for the good of me in God's glory, that can be a sign. But that might just be us walking on the path that we need.
Exactly. Let me give you an example. I was listening to a missionary family. They came back to the Sixth and Maple congregation, and they were retiring. They had been in Africa their entire adult lives, raised their children there, and they traveled from village to village preaching. They said one day, and they knew they were going to get to this next place late, they got lost. Getting lost in the jungle is not a great idea at night. There are predators, right? And they like flesh. They got lost. They didn't know what to do. And he swore by this. He said they got down in a circle and they prayed and says, you got to get us out of here. We've got to. And when they finished praying, a rooster crowed. And they knew there was a village there. He believed that God, whatever, made that happen. Would you call that a sign? He believed it was. That's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. And remember, he said a rooster crowed at night. That's, yeah. Those of us who've been around farm animals know that's not the most. Do what? Yeah. Not often, but they do. Have you got one you'd like to get rid of? Okay. You want me to pray for some wolves or something to come? Okay. Anyway, the idea of a sign, that, I tell you, you could talk to 50 people, get 50 opinions and 50 thoughts on this. And does God answer prayers? Yes, he does. How does he answer that and make those things happen for the benefit of his children? I lean towards what Gil is saying, providence. You know, how do you meet the person that you marry that is the blessing to your life? How does that work out? Is it because you're going to church and doing the right things and you're around other people that are Christians, or you go into the bar? Where are you going to meet the right person to marry? By doing things that need to be done. Anyway, so the thing that I want to get through to me, the biggest thing in this is to have the faith to pray to God for the right things to happen and put your cares and our troubles in his hands and pray, God, lead me, in this case, lead me to the right girl, lead me to the right person. And was this supernatural? No, I agree, it was not supernatural. But anyway, so And it says in verse 15, before he had even finished his prayer, out comes Rebekah. And she is in the family. And so he watches, she does everything that he had prayed about. He asked her for a drink, and she offered to feed water his livestock. And so he's sitting there going, okay. And so he gives her some jewelry, and he tells her why he's there and what's going on. And in verse 27, he says, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers. So he gave her the gifts, tells her what's going on. You know, we can only speculate whether or not he would have been successful had he not prayed. We can speculate all day on that. The servant's response is he gives God the credit for that. So he states his case starting in verse 28 through 51. She goes home, tells her mother's household everything that happened. And so when I was reading this, I thought, well, did she run home and just forget to tell him? Or because it says Laban ran outside to get, so I don't know if he goes, well, girl, let's go get him. You know, I don't know. Couldn't tell for exactly sure on that. But he said, come in, blessed be the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I prepared the house and a place for the camels? So he goes in, tells them, he recounts the story. He starts there. He says, in verse 34, he says, I'm Abraham's servant. And he said, go home to my father's house, to my relatives, take a wife for my son. In verse 38, he has his out. If the woman chooses not to go, he's off, he's free. So he said, Abraham told him in verse 40, the Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel with you to make your journey successful. Abraham had full confidence, and I do believe that the servant had confidence, at least confidence in Abraham's relationship with God, that God was going to make this happen. Because underlying all of this is the promise of the lineage, and the promise that through his lineage, all the nations of the world were going to be blessed through this lineage. So Abraham had that confidence. And so there are different times in the Bible that we can see that there are critical junctures when, how did Joseph get to Egypt? How did all that happen? God make all that happen? Because Joseph had to get there, didn't he? He had to get there to get his family down there to save them from the famine. But he got there. How did God just say, Joseph, I need you to go down to Egypt? No. He got him down there by hook or crook, you might say. Anyway, so there's times like this. So anyway, in verse 47, he asks the young lady, who do you belong to? And the daughter, she says, and he says, and I bowed down and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has guided me in the right way. And so he says, if you're going to be kind to me and truly with my master, let me know. And Laban and Bethuel, the matter comes from the Lord in verse 50. So we cannot speak to you bad or good. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord was spoken. Was this prayer made in public? How would you describe his prayer? What did he say? I prayed what? In my heart. He didn't stand on the street corner and blare out a prayer. It was a prayer between him and God. It was very private and very personal, and of course very important. And so he prayed in that manner, in my heart, in verse 45. So would you say Laban and Bethuel were faithful? They bought the story, didn't they? They believed it. Of course, they know who Abraham is, and I'm sure they heard the stories, and they heard how Abraham rescued Lot from the 5 kings. I'm sure he knew all that, and those things were carried around. They didn't have CNN and Fox News and all that stuff, but the news got around. They knew what was going on. And so Doesn't sound like Rebecca got a choice. Here's Rebecca, she can go. It's, marriage customs vary from country to country. My mother married at 17. She was still in high school. That's the way it happened way back in the 50s. That's the way it was. My grandmother met my grandfather, and she wanted to get married, and he said, I ain't marrying no girl, can't make a shirt. What was waiting on him the next day when he rode by on his horse? A shirt. Then her daddy goes, you ain't getting married because your older sister's not married, so she's going to have to get. So they went out and hustled up somebody for her, and they both got married the same day. We don't do things like that now. And I'm sure in your families, there are stories like that. And, my grandmother told Marvin was it. She was going to marry him. And he got a shirt out of the deal. He got him a shirt. But it's different now, isn't it? So, I have to keep going back. The customs were different. It was different there than it is now, and the times changed. Karen, did you have your hand up?
But she finally was asked in verse 57
If she'd go today.
if she would go.
Yeah, they wanted her to stay for a while. And they did give her a choice, and she said, I'll go. I mean, it was the customs of the time. When you got to a certain age, you needed to be married. It's the way it was. Okay. So, starting in 52, he brings out the articles of silver and gold, the dowry, we would call that today. And he said, let me go. And her brother and her mother said in verse 55, said, let her stay for a few days, say 10, and then go. And he says, don't delay me. And so in verse 57, 58, they asked her, and she said, I'll go. So they sent her away. Notice, they sent her away with her nurse in verse 59, and they gave her a blessing. And in verse 61, she arose with her maids, plural. So she had a group that went with her. She came from a wealthy family. Even if she hadn't had maids, they would have sent her nurse. That was proper decorum. They would not send a young lady by herself with men to take a long journey. There would be another woman with her. That was just the way things were done, and for good reason. So would you say Rebecca was a woman of faith? Or was she just doing as a young lady was expected to do in this day and time? It's hard to say. It's not a culture. Mm-hmm. Yes. I agree. She had to hear everything they heard. Yes. And I would agree that she was a faithful young lady. She knew the story. She knew about Abraham just like they did. So anyway, all right. So in verses 62 through 67, she's traveling. She's getting there close, and she sees him coming out towards them in the field in verse 65, and she is told that the servant said, he is my master, so she veiled and covered herself again, which was proper decorum, modesty for this day and time, knowing that she was going to marry this young man. So she became his wife, and he loved her. Just kind of a quick review, the servant's attitude through all this. You describe the servant as a good person, a faithful person who was a believer. Maybe he wasn't the believer to the state that Abraham was, but he believed in Abraham's relationship to God. We could debate back and forth, I think, whether or not his attitude would have made any difference. God's going to execute his plan, correct? He's going to execute his plan. Whether or not he had given this prayer, we don't know how it would have worked. We are not given that information. And underlying all of this is the fact that God had a plan in mind that through Abraham's lineage, important things were going to happen. So, to be an overall question, how important for young men and young women to pray to find the right person to marry? How important is that? I can't think of anything more important for them to pray about in their relationships, is to pray to find the right person to marry. And I think this is an example here. You know, I don't know what Isaac's doing. If he, you know, during this 2-3 months journey that's going on, it takes, you know, a healthy person can walk 20 miles a day, George? You do a little hiking? That's moving along.
It's more like 13 to 15
Yeah.
on an average.
So they didn't get on I-95 and take off, did they? So there's a long journey, days, probably a month or two that they were gone. Don't know what Isaac was doing. We know we're going to find out he was a praying person. But I think in this we can see the importance of praying for the right person to come into our lives. All righty. The next prayer. And the next, yes.
Pray for our children to find the right, just like Abraham.
Excellent point. Abraham was praying for his child to have the right person to spend the rest of his life together. Yes, exactly. And so, as parents and grandparents, we would pray that our children and grandchildren would find the right person, that God somehow would get them together with the right person for them to spend their life with. Very important. Because they owe us grandchildren, right? They owe that.
You know, Tom, talk about that sign. Sometimes you need God to give you a sign. When they bring that person, it's like, okay, is that the one?
Is that the one?
Really?
Yeah, yeah, because you start the interrogate. Who's your daddy? Who's your mama? Where you live? Where's your family from? What do they do for a living? George.
Well, the concept of the whole thing is he explains it. This guy just shows up from nowhere and starts, saying, looking for this girl. But by the prayer and by telling about God and all this stuff, it influences them to understand that God is playing a part in this. And then we understand we're not fighting God. And in doing this, the girl would also hear all this, understanding that this is, being guided above me. I need to submit to this.
Exactly. All righty. So now they're married. Next chapter, they're married. Skip down to verse 19 of chapter 25. Just so you know, he's 40 when they get married. They don't have a child till he's 60. The Bible tells us that. So got a 20-year window here, okay? All righty. So in verse 20, he's 40 when he married Rebekah. And Isaac, in verse 21, prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Now, if you just stopped right there, say, okay, he said a prayer, and she conceived. But if you skip down a few verses to verse 26, Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth. 20 years passed. So do you think Isaac prayed one time on behalf of his wife?
I'm sure more.
I can't imagine. We're not told that. But I think it's important to remember there's a 20-year window there that they went through, that he prayed for her, knowing he wanted a child, she wanted a child. Now, we don't know all their motives. We can't go there. But I would find it would be difficult to convince me that he just prayed one time on behalf of his wife. If we as a person, really care about another person's well-being, their feelings, how they're doing in their life, one prayer is not what we're going to do. We're going to pray multiple times, continuous, for those people, that person, whatever the situation is. There was 20 years that they hung tough in there, and I can't imagine going that long desiring to have a child and not, and so it had to be difficult. In fact, and then we see that as she's pregnant, something comes to her mind. She sees the struggle within her womb, and she inquired of the Lord also. And she is told you're having twins, and she's told what's going to happen there. So she was a praying person. She inquired of the Lord because of what she felt within her body. And the thing that I want us to get from here is that praying to God on behalf of someone else. And I think that's, to me, these are the lessons I want to get out of these two examples. Got Abraham praying on behalf of his son to get the right person for him. And in some regards, he's praying for her too, because he wants her to be there when his servant gets there. Then we've got Isaac praying on behalf of his wife, because both instances they cared about someone else. Were these prayers in concert with God's purpose?
Yes.
Yes, they were.
His timeline.
Yep.
May not always agree with it.
And we're almost done. Prayer on behalf of another person to me is an absolute necessity if we are a faithful child of God. We should be praying for other people. And whatever's going on, maybe it's an illness, maybe it doesn't have to be about marriage, it could be anything that's going on in another person's life. If we truly love that person, and Abraham loved his son, Isaac loved his wife, and they prayed on behalf of them. As a Christian, we should show that same kind of concern for them. On your handout, I gave you 5 places where Paul said he was praying for that congregation. He said continuously. Wasn't just one prayer. I pray for Ephesus tonight, and that's it. He said he prayed continuously, and I think that's the other part of the lesson. I don't believe that Isaac made one prayer in 20 years. Don't believe it.
Verse 21 said he pleaded with the Lord, so that
Yeah. What version is that by the way?
25.
No, the version. New King James, okay. Pleaded. And I like that. I'm using New American Standard, and I like that pleaded because to me it does imply that there's more than just one night he prays for Rebecca. She was upset today, so I prayed for her today, and that's it. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Next week. Oh, Bill, sorry.
So, how you and Karen met? Where are you met?
I'm not going to give you any credit. We met. This little brunette came up and introduced herself to me on the steps of the 6th and Izzard Church building. Oh, you mean your part. We were talking in front of the church building at 6th and Maple, and Bill says, well, aren't you going to take her to the Lubbock Christian College chorus? They were at Levy, so we went. There you go, and I spilled a Coke in her lap. Ruined her yellow linen dress. And she stayed with me anyway. So anyway, all righty. Next week we're going to talk about Nehemiah praying on behalf of his nation, and Nehemiah chapter 1 and 2. And no, Bill, I'm not going to give you any credit. But yes, he did give the little kick. I'll give you that one. Karen might blame you. All right, I appreciate all the comments and thoughts and ideas expressed, great. And I think the second bell's fixing to catch us. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.